The evening sun hung low in the sky, painting the streets of a quiet California neighborhood in hues of orange and red. The air was warm but carried a faint chill, signaling the end of another long day. In this part of town, life moved at its own pace, slow and uneventful for most, yet tinged with an undercurrent of unease. Crime had been creeping into the area over the years, like weeds overtaking a once pristine garden. Gang activity, drug deals, and random acts of violence were no longer rare occurrences. They were becoming disturbingly common. James "Jim" Thompson, a 72-year-old retired mechanic, shuffled along the cracked sidewalk, his cane tapping rhythmically against the pavement. A small brown paper bag dangled from one hand, filled with essentials he'd picked up from the local grocery store. Bread, milk, a can of soup, and a box of cookies, his guilty pleasure. Jim lived alone now, ever since his wife passed away, 5 years ago. His son Marcus lived far away, serving in some secretive military unit that Jim didn't fully understand. They spoke on the phone every week, but it wasn't the same as having him around. Still, Jim was proud of Marcus. He always had been. Jim's house sat just 2 blocks away from where he currently walked, but instead of taking the main road, he opted for a narrow alley, a shortcut he'd used countless times before. It saved him a few minutes and kept him away from the busier streets, which made him feel safer. But tonight something felt off. The usual hum of crickets was absent, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed down on him like a heavy blanket. Shadows stretched unnaturally long across the ground, and the distant sound of laughter echoed faintly, though he couldn't tell where it came from. As Jim rounded a corner deeper into the alley, movement caught his eye. 3 figures stepped out from behind a dumpster blocking his path. At first glance, they looked like ordinary young men, jeans, hoodies, sneakers, but their faces told a different story. Each bore tattoos etched into their skin, symbols that marked them as members of the Aryan Brotherhood, one of the most feared white supremacist gangs in the country. Their leader, a tall man with a shaved head and a snake tattoo coiled around his neck, smirked when he saw Jim. "Well, well," the man said, his voice dripping with mockery. "What do we have here? An old geezer out for a stroll?" Jim stopped, in his tracks, clutching his cane tightly. His heart began to race, but he forced himself to stay calm. "I'm just heading home," he said, his tone steady despite the fear bubbling inside him. "No trouble?" "No trouble?" the man repeated, feigning surprise. Then his grin turned vicious. "But we love trouble, don't we, boys?" The other 2 chuckled, stepping closer until they formed a loose circle around Jim. One of them kicked his cane away, sending it skittering across the ground. Jim stumbled slightly, trying to regain his balance, but there was nowhere to go. "Hey, old-timer," the leader continued, leaning in close enough for Jim to smell the stale beer on his breath. "You know what happens to people like you in alleys like this?" Before Jim could respond, the man shoved him hard against the brick wall. Pain shot through Jim's back as his frail body slammed into the rough surface. He gasped, struggling to breathe, but the attack was only beginning. The 3 men took turns taunting and hitting him, their fists landing blows to his ribs, face, and stomach. Jim tried to protect himself, raising his arms to shield his head, but it was useless. Every punch sent waves of agony coursing through his body. Through the haze of pain, he heard their laughter, cruel and mocking, as if his suffering was entertainment. One of them spat on him, calling him names laced with racial hatred. Jim, a black man who had endured racism his entire life, clenched his jaw and refused to cry out. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as the beating went on. Jim's vision blurred and his legs buckled beneath him. He collapsed onto the cold concrete, blood trickling from cuts on his face and hands. The men stood over him, panting from exertion, their eyes gleaming with sadistic delight. "That'll teach you to wander where you don't belong," the leader sneered, kicking Jim once more for good measure. Then, without another word, the trio disappeared into the shadows, leaving Jim broken and bleeding in the alley. For several agonizing minutes, Jim lay there, unable to move. The world spun around him, and all he could hear was the ragged sound of his own breathing. Despite the pain, his thoughts drifted to Marcus. His son had always been protective of him, even as a child. If only Marcus were here now, Jim thought bitterly. He would have known how to handle this. But Marcus was miles away, fighting battles of his own, unaware of the nightmare unfolding back home. Eventually, a neighbor walking her dog found Jim and called for help. Paramedics arrived quickly, loading him onto a stretcher and rushing him to the hospital. As the ambulance sped through the streets, sirens wailing, Jim slipped in and out of consciousness. He didn't know it yet, but this brutal attack would set off a chain reaction, one that would bring his estranged son back into his life and ignite a war neither the attackers nor anyone else could have anticipated. Little did the Aryan Brotherhood know the old man they left for dead had a son unlike any other. And when Marcus Thompson learned what had happened, their lives, and the lives of everyone involved, would never be the same again. The phone call came late at night, shattering the quiet solitude of Marcus Thompson's quarters. He was stationed in a remote desert base, far from the bustling cities and chaotic streets he usually operated in. His room was sparse, a cot, a desk, and a few personal belongings, but it provided him with the peace he needed to decompress after months of grueling missions. The ring of his secure satellite phone jolted him awake. It wasn't often that anyone called him directly on this line unless it was urgent. Marcus grabbed the phone, his gut tightening as he recognized the number flashing on the screen. It was his cousin Lisa, who lived near his father in California. She rarely reached out unless something serious had happened. "Hello?" Marcus answered, his voice calm, but laced with concern. "Marcus, it's Jim," Lisa blurted out, her tone trembling. He's in the hospital. Someone attacked him last night." Marcus froze, his mind racing. "What do you mean attacked? Is he okay?" "He's alive, but it's bad," Lisa replied, her voice cracking under the weight of emotion. "They found him beaten up in an alley. The doctors are treating him now, but he's pretty banged up. They said if they'd found him any later." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. A cold fury began to build in Marcus's chest, slowly spreading through his veins like ice. For years, he had trained himself to remain composed under pressure, to suppress emotions that could cloud his judgment during critical moments. But hearing about his father, the man who had raised him, taught him right from wrong and supported him unwaveringly, being brutalized by strangers ignited a fire within him that threatened to consume everything in its path. "I'll be there, as soon as I can," Marcus said firmly, already calculating the logistics of leaving his post. "Keep me updated and don't let him be alone." "I'm coming." Within hours, Marcus had secured emergency leave and boarded a military transport plane bound for California. As the aircraft soared above the clouds, he stared out the window, his thoughts consumed by images of his father lying injured in a hospital bed. Memories flooded his mind, Jim teaching him how to fix cars in their garage, cheering him on at football games, offering quiet advice when life felt overwhelming. Jim had always been a pillar of strength, even when times were tough. Now someone had dared to lay a hand on him, and Marcus couldn't fathom why or how such cruelty existed. When the plane touched down, Marcus didn't waste a second. He rented a car and drove straight to the hospital, ignoring speed limits and red lights. The sterile scent of antiseptic hit him as soon as he entered the building, stirring memories of past injuries sustained during his career. He approached the reception desk, his military bearing commanding attention. "I'm here to see James Thompson," he said curtly. The nurse nodded and directed him to Jim's room. Pushing open the door, Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. There, lying in the hospital bed, was his father. Jim looked smaller somehow, more fragile than Marcus remembered. Bruises covered his face and bandages wrapped his hands and arms. An IV drip fed fluids into his arm, and a heart monitor beeped steadily beside him. For a moment, Marcus stood frozen, overwhelmed by a mix of anger and helplessness. Then Jim stirred, opening his eyes weakly. When he saw Marcus, a faint smile crossed his swollen lips. "Marcus," he rasped, his voice barely audible, "you didn't have to come all the way here." "Yes, I did," Marcus replied, stepping closer and gripping his father's hand gently. Who did this to you, Dad? Tell me everything. Jim hesitated, clearly reluctant to relive the ordeal, but Marcus pressed him, his tone firm yet compassionate. Slowly, Jim recounted the events of the previous night. The shortcut through the alley, the three men appearing out of nowhere, the relentless beating, and the hateful words they spat at him. By the time Jim finished, tears welled up in his eyes, not from pain but from shame. I should have fought back harder, he muttered bitterly. I shouldn't have let them. No, Marcus interrupted sharply, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. This isn't your fault, Dad. None of it is. These cowards prey on people like you because they think they can get away with it. But they're going to learn otherwise. Over the next few hours, Marcus stayed by his father's side, ensuring he was comfortable and safe. He spoke briefly with the attending physician, who assured him that Jim's injuries, while severe, were not life-threatening. With proper care, he would recover fully. But Marcus knew that physical wounds healed faster than emotional scars. Seeing his father in such a vulnerable state filled him with a deep sense of guilt. He had always promised to protect Jim, yet he hadn't been there when it mattered most. Once Jim drifted off to sleep, Marcus excused himself and stepped outside. Pulling out his phone, he dialed a contact embedded deep in his encrypted address. "Oh, sir." After a few rings, a gravelly voice answered. "This better be important, Thompson." "It is," Marcus replied, his voice low and dangerous. "I need intel, fast. Gang activity in Southern California, specifically the Aryan Brotherhood. Last night they attacked my father." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Damn," the voice finally said. "I'll get you what you need. Just give me a couple of hours." True to his word, Marcus received a detailed report by morning. The document included recent activities of the local Aryan Brotherhood chapter, known affiliations, and photographs of key members. Among them, Marcus recognized one face immediately, the man with the snake tattoo around his neck. According to the file, his name was Kyle Snake Dawson, a mid-level enforcer with a reputation for brutality. He was also the leader of the trio responsible for attacking Jim. As Marcus studied the information, his mind worked methodically, piecing together a plan. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice, and Marcus knew exactly how to deliver it. Over the years, he had built a network of trusted allies, former Delta Force operatives, intelligence analysts, and skilled tacticians, each capable of executing precise operations. He assembled a small team, reaching out only to those he could trust implicitly. Within 48 hours, they convened in a nondescript safe house near Jim's neighborhood. The briefing was short and to the point. Marcus laid out the mission objectives: locate the perpetrators, gather evidence of their involvement, and neutralize the threat they posed, not just to Jim, but to the entire community. "These scumbags think they're untouchable," Marcus said, his voice dripping with contempt. "We're going to prove them wrong." One member of the team, a tech specialist named Riley, accessed surveillance footage from cameras near the alley where the attack took place. Grainy images confirmed what Jim had described. 3 men surrounding an elderly figure, their movements aggressive and deliberate. Facial recognition software matched 2 of them to the Aryan Brotherhood database. Another teammate, a former Marine named Carter, identified their hideout, a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of town. By the time the meeting concluded, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. The pieces were falling into place and the operation was taking shape. But as he reviewed the plans one final time, a thought lingered in the back of his mind. This wasn't just about dismantling a gang. It was about sending a message. No one messed with his family and got away with it. And when Marcus Thompson set his sights on a target, failure was never an option. With preparations complete, Marcus returned to the hospital to check on his father. Jim was awake, sipping water and attempting to eat a bland hospital meal. Despite his frail appearance, there was a spark of defiance in his eyes, a quality Marcus had inherited from him. Sitting beside the bed, Marcus placed a reassuring hand on Jim's shoulder. "Don't worry, Dad. he said softly. I'll take care of this. You won't have to worry about them ever again. Jim frowned, concern flickering across his face. Be careful, son. These aren't ordinary thugs. They're dangerous, Marcus smiled grimly. So am I. The night was moonless, cloaked in a thick darkness that seemed almost alive. The air carried a faint metallic tang, mingling with the distant hum of traffic and the occasional bark of a stray dog. Somewhere on the outskirts of town, an abandoned warehouse loomed like a shadowy beast, its broken windows staring blankly into the void. Inside, the members of the Aryan Brotherhood chapter responsible for Jim's attack were gathered, oblivious to the storm about to descend upon them. Marcus stood atop a nearby rooftop, his silhouette barely visible against the starless sky. Beside him, his team, Riley, Carter, and two others named Blake and Elena, were positioned strategically, each armed with precision gear and years of combat experience. They communicated through earpieces, their voices calm and clipped as they finalized their approach. This wasn't just another mission, it was personal. For Marcus, every heartbeat echoed with the memory of his father lying bruised and broken in that hospital bed. Eyes on target, Riley whispered, adjusting her tablet to display live footage from drones hovering silently above the warehouse. Thermal imaging revealed 6 heat signatures moving inside, including 2 that matched the profiles of the men who had attacked Jim. Kyle "Snake" Dawson, the leader, was also present, pacing near what appeared to be a makeshift command center. Copy that, Marcus replied, his voice steady but laced with tension. He adjusted the strap of his tactical vest, ensuring his weapons were secure. Then, turning to his team, he gave the signal. Move out. The operation began with surgical precision. Using silenced firearms, Marcus and his team disabled the exterior lights surrounding the warehouse, plunging the area into deeper darkness. Shadows became their allies as they closed in, their movements silent and deliberate. At Marcus's command, 2 flashbang grenades sailed through shattered windows, erupting in blinding flashes of light and deafening bursts of sound. Chaos erupted instantly within the warehouse. Before the gang members could recover, Marcus led the charge, rappelling down from the roof and landing squarely in the middle of the fray. His boots hit the ground with a muted thud, and he immediately sprang into action. One of the gang members lunged at him with a knife, but Marcus sidestepped effortlessly, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it until the weapon clattered to the floor. A swift elbow strike to the jaw sent the attacker crumpling to the ground unconscious. Carter and Blake entered from opposite sides, sweeping the room with methodical efficiency. Elena provided cover fire, her aim unerring as she neutralized threats without causing fatal injuries. Their objective wasn't to kill, not yet, but to incapacitate and gather information. As the gang members scrambled to regroup, panic spread like wildfire among them. They were used to preying on the weak and defenseless, not facing highly trained operators who moved like ghosts. One of the attackers, a wiry man with a swastika tattooed on his forehead, tried to flee toward a back exit. Marcus anticipated the move and intercepted him mid-stride, slamming him against the wall with enough force to rattle the entire structure. "Where's your boss?" Marcus growled, pressing the man's face hard against the concrete. The gang member stammered incoherently, fear overriding any attempt at bravado. With a quick nod to Elena, Marcus handed him over for questioning while he continued deeper into the warehouse. Inside, Kyle Dawson was shouting orders, trying to rally his remaining followers, but his voice cracked under the weight of desperation. When Marcus finally confronted him, Dawson's eyes widened in recognition. Word had spread quickly about the mysterious operative dismantling their operations, and now, face to face with Marcus, Dawson realized he was dealing with someone far beyond his league. "You've got some nerve coming here," Dawson spat, attempting to mask his terror with aggression. He reached for a pistol holstered at his side, but Marcus was faster. In one fluid motion, he disarmed Dawson and pinned him to the ground, pressing a knee firmly into his chest. "Who are you?" Dawson demanded, his voice trembling. "Someone you should have thought twice about crossing," Marcus replied coldly. He leaned closer, his gaze piercing. "You hurt my father. Now it's time to pay." Dawson's bravado shattered completely. "Look, man, I didn't mean— Save it," Marcus interrupted, yanking Dawson to his feet. "Tell me everything you know about your organization. Names, locations, plans, or things will get worse for you." Under duress, Dawson spilled details about the gang's hierarchy, ongoing operations, and future targets. It was clear they weren't just a local nuisance. They were part of a larger network spreading hate and violence across multiple states. Marcus recorded every word, ensuring nothing slipped through the cracks. Once satisfied, he signaled his team to extract. As they left the warehouse behind, the surviving gang members lay bound and gagged, awaiting law enforcement arrival. Evidence collected during the raid would ensure convictions, but Marcus wasn't done yet. There was still one loose end to tie up, the other attacker who hadn't been at the warehouse. And Marcus knew exactly where to find him. Back at the safe house, the team regrouped to analyze the intel gathered from Dawson. Among the names mentioned was a low-ranking enforcer known only as Twitch. According to Dawson, Twitch frequented a seedy bar downtown called the Iron Pit, a notorious hangout for criminals looking to lay low. It was risky territory, crawling with unsavory characters, but Marcus didn't hesitate. If Twitch thought he could hide in plain sight, he was sorely mistaken. That same night, Marcus went alone, blending seamlessly into the crowd at the Iron Pit. Dressed in a black leather jacket and jeans, he looked like any other patron nursing a drink at the bar. The dim lighting and pulsating music masked his presence as he scanned the room, searching for his target. Sure enough, Twitch sat at a corner table, laughing loudly with a group of fellow thugs. His shaved head and jagged scar running along his jaw made him easy to identify. Marcus approached casually, sliding into the seat across from Twitch. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his tone friendly but edged with menace. Twitch glanced up, irritation flashing across his face. "What do you want?" "Just a little chat," Marcus said, leaning forward slightly. "About an old man you attacked a few nights ago." Recognition dawned in Twitch's eyes, followed swiftly by alarm. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, reaching for something beneath the table. Marcus acted before Twitch could draw whatever weapon he had hidden. Grabbing the man's wrist, he twisted it painfully, eliciting a sharp cry of pain. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be," Marcus said evenly. "Talk, or I'll make sure you regret it." Pinned and outnumbered by Marcus's imposing figure, Twitch cracked almost immediately. He admitted to participating in the attack on Jim, claiming it had been Dawson's idea. "We were just following orders," he pleaded. "Please don't hurt me." Marcus stared at him, disgust simmering beneath his composed exterior. "You picked the wrong person to mess with," he said quietly. Then, pulling out his phone, he snapped photos of Twitch's tattoos and face, uploading them to a secure database accessible by law enforcement. "When the cops come knocking, maybe think twice before hurting innocent people." With that, Marcus walked away, leaving Twitch trembling in his seat. Outside, the cool night air felt refreshing after the stifling atmosphere of the bar, as he climbed into his car. Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. 2 of the men responsible for his father's suffering were accounted for, and justice was closing in. But there was still work to be done. The next morning, Marcus returned to the hospital to check on Jim. His father looked marginally better, though the bruises on his face remained vivid reminders of the ordeal. Sitting beside the bed, Marcus shared a sanitized version of the events, omitting the violent details. "They won't bother you again," he assured Jim, squeezing his hand gently. "I promise." Jim studied his son's face, sensing the weight of what Marcus wasn't saying. "You did good, son," he murmured, pride shining in his eyes. "But remember, vengeance isn't everything." Marcus nodded, knowing his father was right. Still, as he gazed out the window at the rising sun, he couldn't shake the feeling that this fight was far from over. The Aryan Brotherhood might have been weakened, but hatred like theirs didn't die easily. And Marcus knew he had to stay vigilant, for Jim, for his community, and for anyone else who might fall victim to such cruelty. For now, however, The immediate threat was neutralized, and Marcus vowed to use his skills not just for revenge, but for something greater, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The days following the takedown of the Aryan Brotherhood's local chapter brought a mix of relief and unease to Jim's neighborhood. For years, residents had lived under the shadow of fear, tiptoeing around gang activity and avoiding certain streets after dark. But now something had shifted. The once ubiquitous presence of tattooed thugs was noticeably absent, replaced by an eerie calm that felt almost foreign. People began venturing outside more freely, chatting with neighbors they hadn't spoken to in months. It was as if a weight had been lifted, though few understood why or how it had happened. Marcus watched these changes from afar, keeping a low profile despite the surge of gratitude swelling within him. He wasn't seeking recognition or praise. His actions were driven by a deeply personal sense of justice. Yet as he walked through the streets where his father had been attacked, Marcus couldn't help but feel a pang of satisfaction. The message had been sent loud and clear. Violence against the innocent would not go unanswered. Still, he knew better than to let his guard down completely. Hatred like the Aryan Brotherhood's didn't vanish overnight. It merely went underground, waiting for the right moment to resurface. Back at the hospital, Jim continued to recover, his strength slowly returning. Though physically battered, his spirit remained unbroken. He spent hours talking with Marcus, sharing stories from his younger days and marveling at the man his son had become. "You've always been strong, Marcus," Jim said one afternoon, his voice tinged with pride. "But seeing you step up like this, it makes me realize just how much you've grown." Marcus smiled faintly, though his thoughts were elsewhere. "I just did what needed to be done, Dad. Nothing special." "Don't sell yourself short," Jim replied firmly. "What you've done takes courage and skill. Not everyone has that." Though touched by his father's words, Marcus couldn't shake the lingering guilt gnawing at him. If only he'd been closer. Maybe none of this would have happened. The attack on Jim had exposed vulnerabilities, not just in their family, but in the community at large. And Marcus knew he couldn't walk away until those vulnerabilities were addressed. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about creating lasting change. In the weeks that followed, Marcus began working behind the scenes to dismantle the remaining threads of the Aryan Brotherhood's influence in the area. Using his military connections, he collaborated with federal agencies to track down higher-ranking members of the gang who had fled after the warehouse raid. Evidence collected during the operation proved invaluable, leading to multiple arrests and dismantling key operations across several states. Local law enforcement, initially baffled by the sudden drop in gang activity, eventually pieced together fragments of the puzzle, but they never uncovered the full extent of Marcus's involvement. Meanwhile, Marcus turned his attention to the community itself. He realized that simply removing the threat wasn't enough. People needed tools and resources to protect themselves and rebuild trust among one another. With the help of Riley, Carter, and other trusted allies, Marcus organized self-defense workshops for residents, teaching them basic techniques to fend off attackers. These sessions weren't just about physical skills, they were about empowerment, instilling confidence in individuals who had long felt powerless. One evening, as Marcus led a group of teenagers through a series of drills in a makeshift gym, he noticed a young boy watching intently from the sidelines. The boy, no older than 12, reminded Marcus of himself at that age. Curious, eager to learn, but burdened by circumstances beyond his control. After the session ended, Marcus approached him. "You want to join us next time?" he asked gently. The boy hesitated, then nodded shyly. "Yeah, but I don't think I'm good at this stuff." "You don't have to be good right away," Marcus assured him. "Just show up. That's all it takes." From that day forward, the boy became a regular participant, soaking up every lesson Marcus offered. Watching him improve week by week filled Marcus with hope. Perhaps the cycle of violence could be broken, not through hatred or retaliation, but through education, mentorship, and unity. As Marcus immersed himself in helping the community, Jim grew stronger with each passing day. Doctors declared him well enough to return home, and Marcus insisted on staying nearby to ensure his safety. Together they settled into a routine, spending mornings sipping coffee on the porch and evenings reminiscing about old memories. Despite everything that had happened, there was a newfound closeness between them, a bond forged in adversity that neither time nor distance could weaken. But Marcus also used this period to reflect on his own life. His career in Delta Force had taken him to some of the most dangerous corners of the world, yet nothing had prepared him for the emotional toll of seeing his father hurt. It made him question whether he was truly making a difference, or if he was simply perpetuating cycles of violence in different forms. Was there a way to channel his skills towards something more constructive, something that could prevent tragedies like Jim's attack from happening in the first place? The answer came unexpectedly during a community meeting held at a local church. Residents gathered to discuss ways to revitalize the neighborhood, proposing initiatives ranging from youth programs to neighborhood watch groups. When someone suggested forming a coalition to combat racism and gang activity, Marcus found himself raising his hand to volunteer. "I can help," he said simply, drawing surprised looks from the crowd. "Let's start by educating people about the dangers of hate groups and giving them the tools to stand up against them." His offer sparked a wave of enthusiasm. Soon Marcus was coordinating efforts with local leaders, schools, and advocacy organizations to create workshops and seminars aimed at fostering understanding and resilience. He shared his experiences, not just as a soldier, but as someone whose family had directly suffered because of prejudice. His honesty resonated deeply with attendees, many of whom admitted they had never fully grasped the impact of such ideologies before. Through these initiatives, Marcus discovered a new purpose. Fighting battles overseas had taught him discipline and strategy, but working within his own community allowed him to see tangible results. Kids who once idolized gang members started looking up to mentors like Marcus instead. Parents felt safer letting their children play outside, and slowly but surely, the neighborhood began to heal. Despite the progress, Marcus remained vigilant. Late at night, when the streets were quiet and the stars stretched endlessly above, he often found himself thinking about the fragility of peace. Hate groups like the Aryan Brotherhood might have retreated for now, but their ideology persisted, a poison that seeped into vulnerable minds and exploited fear and ignorance. Eradicating it entirely would require more than raids or arrests. It would take generations of effort, patience, and unwavering commitment. One evening, as Marcus sat on the porch with Jim, he voiced these thoughts aloud. "It feels like we're winning," he said, gazing out at the darkened street. "But I know it's not over. People like them will always exist, won't they?" Jim nodded thoughtfully, leaning back in his chair. "Probably. But that doesn't mean we stop fighting. Every little victory matters, Marcus. Every person you reach, every kid you inspire, that's a step forward. And sometimes, those steps add up to something bigger than we ever imagined." Marcus considered his father's words, feeling a renewed sense of resolve. Jim was right. The fight against hatred and violence was far from finished, but it was worth waging. And as long as there were people willing to stand up and push back, there was hope for Jim, for the community, and for the future. With that thought in mind, Marcus stood and stretched, glancing at the horizon where the first hints of dawn were beginning to appear. The road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready. After all, he had faced worse and come out stronger on the other side. Months had passed since the brutal attack on Jim, and the neighborhood was beginning to transform in ways no one could have predicted. The once shadowy streets now buzzed with activity during the day, as families strolled together, children played basketball at the refurbished court, and elderly residents gathered on porches to share stories. The sense of fear that had hung over the community like a storm cloud was lifting, replaced by a cautious optimism. While the scars of the past remained, both visible and invisible, the collective effort to rebuild trust and resilience was evident everywhere. Marcus Thompson had become a quiet but undeniable force behind this change. Though he never sought recognition, his presence was felt throughout the neighborhood. From leading self-defense classes to mentoring young people, Marcus poured his energy into creating a safer environment for everyone. His dedication inspired others to step up as well, forming a ripple effect that strengthened the community's resolve. Yet despite the progress, Marcus knew the work was far from over. Hate and violence were persistent adversaries, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for an opportunity to resurface. One crisp autumn morning, Jim stood proudly beside Marcus at a community event held in the park. Local leaders, activists, and residents had come together to celebrate their achievements and honor those who had contributed to the neighborhood's revitalization. A banner stretched across the stage read, "United we rise, building a stronger community," flanked by colorful balloons and tables laden with homemade food. It was a stark contrast to the desolation that had defined the area just months earlier. As they took their seats near the front, Jim glanced at his son, pride shining in his eyes. "You've done more than anyone expected, Marcus," he said, softly. "I'm proud of you." Marcus smiled, though his expression was tinged with humility. "It's not just me, Dad. Everyone here played a part. I'm just glad we're moving in the right direction." The ceremony began with speeches from local officials, each praising the unity and determination displayed by the community. But when it came time for Marcus to speak, the crowd fell silent, eagerly awaiting his words. Standing before them, microphone in hand, Marcus scanned the faces looking back at him. Young and old, diverse yet united by shared struggles and dreams. "When my father was attacked," Marcus began, his voice steady and clear, "it wasn't just an assault on him. It was an attack on all of us, on our values, our safety, and our ability to live without fear. For too long, gangs like the Aryan Brotherhood thrived because they preyed on division and weakness. But today we stand stronger than ever because we chose to fight back, not with hate, but with hope." His words resonated deeply, drawing nods of agreement and murmurs of encouragement from the audience. He went on to recount the events of the past few months, carefully omitting specific details about his clandestine operations. Instead, he focused on the broader message that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things when they work together. "We've made incredible strides," Marcus continued, "but let's not fool ourselves into thinking the battle is won. There will always be challenges ahead, moments when it feels easier to give up than to keep pushing forward. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to act despite it. And every single person here has shown that kind of courage." By the time Marcus finished speaking, the crowd erupted into applause, some even rising to their feet. Jim wiped away a tear, overwhelmed by the outpouring of gratitude directed at his son. For Marcus, however, the moment wasn't about accolades. It was about reminding everyone of their power to create positive change. After the event, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues across the sky. Marcus and Jim walked home together. The streets were alive with laughter and conversation, a testament to how far the neighborhood had come. Yet Marcus couldn't shake the lingering awareness that vigilance was still necessary. Hate groups might have retreated temporarily, but their ideologies persisted, finding new ways to infiltrate vulnerable communities. "What's next for you?" Jim asked suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "Are you going back to your unit?" Marcus hesitated, considering the question. His leave was nearing its end, and he knew his superiors would expect him to return soon. But something inside him resisted the idea of leaving. This place, his father's home, his roots, had become more than just a temporary assignment. It had reignited a passion within him, using his skills not just for combat but for protection and prevention. "I don't know yet," Marcus admitted after a pause. "But whatever I do, it'll be something that helps people. Maybe I'll stay here a while longer, keep working with the community. Or maybe I'll find another way to make a difference. Either way, I'm not walking away just yet." Jim nodded approvingly. "Good, you found your purpose, son. That's rare. Hold on to it." In the weeks that followed, Marcus solidified his commitment to staying involved. He partnered with local organizations to expand the programs. He had started focusing on education, mentorship, and conflict resolution. Schools invited him to speak to students about the dangers of gang involvement and the importance of standing against prejudice. Community centers hosted workshops where residents could learn practical skills to protect themselves, while fostering dialogue and understanding. One evening, as Marcus led a group discussion at the youth center, a teenage girl raised her hand, timidly. "What if someone tries to recruit us?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "How do we say no without getting hurt?" Marcus leaned forward, meeting her gaze with unwavering sincerity. "The hardest battles are the ones fought inside your mind," he replied. "Fear can make you feel trapped, but remember this. You're stronger than you think. Surround yourself with people who support you and don't be afraid to ask for help. Together we can shut down anyone trying to bring hate into our lives." The room erupted in applause, and the girl smiled shyly, visibly reassured. Moments like these reminded Marcus why he stayed, to empower others, to plant seeds of hope that would grow long after he moved on. As winter approached, the community prepared for its annual holiday celebration, a tradition that had been revived thanks to their collective efforts. Lights twinkled along Main Street, wreaths adorned lampposts, and carolers sang cheerful tunes outside local businesses. At the heart of it all stood Marcus and Jim, side by side, marveling at the transformation they had witnessed. For Jim, life had returned to a semblance of normalcy, though he carried the memory of his attack with grace and resilience. For Marcus, the experience had redefined his path, steering him toward a future dedicated to service beyond the battlefield. Together, they embodied the spirit of renewal, a testament to the strength of family and community. As snowflakes began to fall gently, from the sky, Marcus placed a comforting arm around his father's shoulders. "We did good, Dad," he said quietly. Jim chuckled, his breath visible in the cold air. "Yes, we did, and we're not done yet." With that, they turned and headed home, leaving behind footprints in the freshly fallen snow, a symbol of the journey they had undertaken and the brighter days that lay ahead.